Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you for inviting me to the East Hampton Library. My name is Evan Weiner, and I've been doing this kind of thing since 1971, when I was 15 years old. I was at Spring Valley High School in Rockland County in Muncie, New York, and I had a teacher by the name of Joe Dionisio who didn't know anybody's name, but he said to me, "Student, you got a good voice." And I said, "Thank you." He said, "How'd you like to be on radio?" And I said, "I want to be in radio the worst way." And I was. I was on the Spring Valley High School radio show on WRKL called Tiger Talk. Joe did a lot for my career. He got me on radio, and he opened the door for me in newspapers with the Nyack Journal News and also the Bergen Record, doing stringing stuff at first. And 49 years later, I still talk to Joe, and I doubt that Joe knows my name. In 1978, I had my first big scoop. I was a year ahead in school, so I graduated at 21. And it's March of 1978, and the New York State Democrats are holding a fundraiser in Nyack, New York. And my boss, Steve North at WGRC Radio, a 500-watt radio station in Rockland County, said, "Go over and find something." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Don't worry about Saturday, just do it for Monday morning." I found something, or it found me. John Lindsay came in, and he makes a beeline straight to me, and he puts his arm around me and says, "I want to tell you something." He didn't even introduce himself. He told me something. And I said, "What do you want to tell me?" He says, "I'm running for Senate, state of New York in 1980. And I said, "Can you tell that into my microphone?" Because he was inebriated. And he did. I ran back to my station and sent it to UPI and AP because we were an affiliate with them. And then I got a call from Henry Marcotte at WNEW Radio. "How would you like to do that story for us?" I said, "Sure. How much are you going to pay me?" He said, $10, sold. And for 3.5 years, I did work with WNEW. Among the people that I interviewed for WNEW was candidate Ronald Reagan, along with Ted Kennedy and some other people. So that's my background, and I'm sticking to it. Florida. It wasn't until Bob Lipsyte had mentioned this to me, and you might know Bob. He lives out in your area. He used to be on PBS, and he had a column in the New York Times. And we were talking one day about him being locked in the room with John, Paul, George, and Ringo waiting for Cassius Clay. And I do speak on cruise ships here and there. And I was in the Caribbean, and one of the things I needed to talk about was Florida. And I said, what am I going to talk about Florida? It's got mosquitoes, it's got humidity. There's got to be more to that than that. And then I remembered what Lipsyte told me. And then I started looking up about how history, real or cultural history, really did change in Florida in some instances. Now, before I get there, that is Flagler, Henry Morrison Flagler. And like every good New Yorker, or seemingly every good New Yorker, he decided he wanted to winter in Florida, except he had more money than most of us, more money in the 1880s. And he started to think about, the America doesn't have a Riviera. Now, I got all this money. I'm partners with John D. Rockefeller. Maybe I could find a Riviera somewhere. So he did. He went down to Florida, and this is what caught his eye. Palm beaches, sunset, although this isn't a sunset because this is Fort Lauderdale and it's a light. It's not a sunset. Anyway, and he's thinking, hey, you know what? I could create this Riviera, although he never got as far as Fort Lauderdale in his original plans, and I can make money off it. And people could go and enjoy themselves. Henry Flagler was on the board of directors of Standard Oil. John D. Rockefeller was, of course, Standard Oil. And he gives up his day-to-day involvement in the corporation to pursue his dream, to build the American Riviera in Florida. He returned to St. Augustine's. He had been going there for a while, St. Augustine, in 1885, and started the construction of a hotel. Hotel's name, Ponce de Leon. Ponce de Leon, yeah, he comes to North America, right? One of the Spanish explorers. And he's convinced Florida has the Fountain of Youth, and he's running all over Florida looking for the Fountain of Youth. He never finds it, but we now know that Ponce de Leon was seeking the Fountain of Youth, and Flagler said, hey, that's a good name for a hotel. And St. Augustine's is one of the oldest settlements in the United States. And that old wood house in St. Augustine's is the oldest wood school in the United States. And that's where he was going to make his headquarters, in St. Augustine. And that is a statue of Ponce de Leon in St. Augustine. He never quite found that fountain, but at least he's got a statue there in St. Augustine. Flagler decided, hey, you know what? If I want to really do this, I got to do this right. So he purchases some short line railroads. It would later become known as the Florida East Coast Railway. And he is going to build this Riviera from, say, St. Augustine down the coast to Palm Beach. Palm Beach is fine. Actually, Palm Beach is the last really populated area back in the 1880s in Florida. After that, it's just all swampland. So his goal, create the American Riviera. West Palm Beach is going to be the end of his railroad system. But it gets cold in Florida, something that Flagler didn't know. It actually did get cold in Florida, 1894, 1895. A friend of mine sent up a picture. It was 57 degrees in Florida, and she's wearing a coat, a winter coat, 57 degrees the other day. Really cold down there. Anyway, but they really had freezes hit the area, and then Flagler is like, oh, wait a minute. You can't have a Riviera if we have freezes. And look, these 2 years we've had freezes. What am I to do? Well, he did talk to some locals, and the locals said, hey, you know what? About 60 miles down the road, there is a lot of land available. You should go down there and you should talk to Julia Tuttle and William Brickell. There is the Julia Tuttle Causeway today. And he said, okay. So along the way, he was offered land from private landowners, and he gets down to the Miami River, and Tuttle and Brickell are open to him. And all of a sudden, they tell him there is no freezing down there in Miami. No freezing. It's always warm. And he says, let's do it. And they do. That is Palm Beach. That's the very exclusive Breakers Hotel back in 2000, where I had a major scoop. San Diego Chargers owner Alex Spanos told me, walking those halls, he was upset in San Diego, and that laid the ground for the San Diego Chargers National Football League team to eventually move back to Los Angeles. That's where he wanted to end his railroad, but he got down to Fort Lauderdale and a little beyond Fort Lauderdale. That's Fort Lauderdale about a year and a half ago. Flagler also said, hey, listen to the locals. Farm, fruit farming, settle along my railroad line, and it'll work out for you. And he also said, you know what? I have money. I'll build hospitals. I'll build churches. I'll build schools. Let's get it all together. And they did. And that is the beginning of really Florida as a tourist attraction. By 1896, Flagler's railroad reached Biscayne Bay, the Florida East Coast Railroad. Flagler dredged the channel, built streets, instituted the first water and power systems, and he needed a name for this place, and he figured out the name for this place, Miami, which Ed Sullivan used on his show when he introduced the Beatles at the hotel in Miami, live from Miami. That was old Ed. Jerry Stiller, it was my cousin, and Stiller and Mirror, of course, were on that show a lot. He had a lot of stories that ends up in my next talk with you about the early days of TV. Anyway, so this is what you see. This was the Riviera, the American Riviera. Miami and the surrounding areas grew because of tourism. It was a destination for those seeking to flee colder winter climates. The area would get a major boost in the 1960s when Jackie Gleason decided to move his television show to Miami Beach, the sun and fun capital of the world. That was in 1966, and Jackie Gleason is one of the reasons that people actually moved to Miami Beach, because he showed off the beach. That was part of the what was it called? American Scene Magazine. That was part of American Scene Magazine. The Orange Bowl, they started playing football in 1935 in the bowl game. That brings attention to Miami as well. And you got the Everglades. That's my son sitting in the Everglades, and people like going to the Everglades. But the worlds collide on February 18th, 1964. I've known Bob Lipsyte for about 35 years. He was a New York Times sports writer, and then he went on to write books, and also was on TV on PBS as an interviewer. And if you get the book, and you probably have it in the library, it's called The Accidental Sports Writer. Bob talks about the worlds colliding on February 18th, 1964. And there's Bob Lipsyte, who coined the phrase jockocracy that Howard Cosell liberally borrowed from him to describe former athletes taking over jobs in the sports industry instead of professional TV announcers like Howard Cosell. Sonny Liston was the heavyweight champion of the world. Sonny Liston was once an enforcer for the mob, the baddest guy in the world, and he was able to put opponents away, and he's going to be fighting this brash guy who had won a medal at the 1960 Rome Olympics, 1960 Rome Olympics, by the name of Cassius Clay. And Cassius Clay, Angelo Dundee told me this story. A lot of this stuff comes from Dundee as well. Dundee said in 1963, Muhammad Ali, then known as Cassius Clay, was there for a fight, and it's Friday night. And Muhammad Ali grew up as a huge wrestling fan in Louisville, Kentucky, liked Gorgeous George, but he's watching wrestling with Dundee. And he looks up, and there's Classy Freddie Blassie, and he says, that's it. That's who I'm going to be. I'm going to be the bad guy, and they're going to all come out and see me, and I'm going to make a lot of money being the bad guy. So he's chasing Liston all over the place because he's got this championship shot finally, and he is pulling every wrestling move in the business, and Liston is having none of it. Meanwhile, he's training at the Fifth Street Gym. And there's this group from Liverpool who comes over to the United States on February 7th, 1964. And they go on the Sullivan Show, and they are booked for 3 appearances on the Sullivan Show. February 9th, February 16th, February 23rd. And the Beatles, at least John Lennon, really wanted to meet Sonny Liston. John Lennon had no interest in meeting Cassius Clay. And something is set up where the Beatles and Clay are going to meet on February 18th. And Bob Lipsyte is working for the New York Times, and it's spring training. And Fort Lauderdale is where the New York Yankees trained. And Fort Lauderdale is about 19 miles from Miami Beach. Although if you take 95, it might take you an hour and a half to go those 19 miles. Anyway, the Times editor said, hey, Bob, why don't you go down there and see what's going on? He does. And he is ushered into this room, this waiting room, and there are 4 guys in this waiting room. Their names, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison. And Bob told me 3 of the guys were actually quite nice, Paul, George, and Ringo, but John Lennon was not happy being locked up in yet another room, which is all the Beatles were when they were doing the first American tour. They just went from their room to the train to perform. Actually, they only performed once because they were on vacation. Twice, Washington, D.C., and for Sullivan at the hotel down there. And anyway, so Lennon is really upset, and he's saying things like, I don't want to be here. I only associate myself with winners, just winners. And I know this guy, Clay, he's not going to beat Sonny Liston. He's not a winner. He's not a winner at all. And I don't associate with winners. I don't only associate with winners. I don't associate with losers. They're in there for about a half hour, and Lennon is trying to cool his heels, and Lipsyte's listening to all this. And finally, the door opens. All the newspaper guys are there with their flashing cameras, and there are TV people there, and they're about ready to roll the film, and they take up this pose. Now, before you see this pose, Ali, or Cassius Clay at that time, was heard to say, who are those 4 sissy boys over there? Now, Here is Cassius Clay, and here are the Beatles, and immediately they break into showbiz, Clay puts his fist out. These guys fall over sideways. Ringo Starr jumps on Clay's back, and he is running around Angelo Dundee's Fifth Street gym. And 15 minutes, iconic photos, gone, absolutely gone. But you think these guys knew each other forever. And Lipsyte said, this is where worlds collide. And this is what he means by where worlds collide. Beatles had come over. They did conquer Shea Stadium, the Ed Sullivan Show. They did do well in Washington, but they haven't really done anything else. What if they were just one-month wonders, which is possible, that they were one-month wonders? And what if Cassius Clay lost to Sonny Liston? And Lipsyte spent a day, February 18th, 1964, with what would have been something people would have totally forgotten about. Well, the Beatles did produce, as did Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay, of course, became the world heavyweight champion, and then immediately became Muhammad X, and then Muhammad Ali, joining the Nation of Islam. And the Beatles went on. They did Hard Day's Night, the film. They did all the records. They toured in the United States. But what if? What if no success came their way? And Lipsyte talks about that, how the worlds collided. And it took a lot of stuff to happen to make sure that this day worlds collided. And there's me with Ali. That is 1985. I did speak to Ali a few times over the years. The last time I tried to speak to him was in 1985. By that point, the Parkinson's had gotten to him. He just took too many punches to the head, 60,000, an estimated 60,000 punches to the head. And that day he was getting an award, but didn't speak to anybody. Meanwhile, what about the Beatles and what about Cassius Clay? Did they have a history afterwards? Well, they kind of. And there's me, half of me you could see anyway. The microphone pulled back to me because I'm asking a question of Ali. That's in 1983. Dundee had the gym where Cassius Clay trained for his fight with Sonny Liston in 1964. It was the Fifth Street Gym, and Clay, of course, beat Liston, although some people said he didn't. But he did, and he beat him in a rematch in 1965. And you know the rest of the history of Cassius Clay. In 1967, he refused to go into the military service, did do some protest marches. I was doing this talk at the 92nd Street Y, and a woman said one of the highlights of her life was Muhammad Ali was 6 people next to her, marching with her in an anti-war protest in Manhattan. So he goes on. He's in exile for 3.5 years. He's convicted of evading the draft. That's overturned. Comes back in 1970 with the help of Lester Maddox, of all people. The governor of Georgia, fights in Atlanta, and then he's fighting the rest of the 1970s, and he becomes a good guy. He becomes somebody people cheer for. And there is Angelo Dundee and my son, when Angie and my son and I had about 4 hours together talking about stuff. But what happened to the Beatles and Ali and Sonny Liston? Well, if you look at Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band's album cover, take a look on the left side where the Wax Beatles are standing, and look to George Harrison's right with all of these heroes of the Beatles. Bob Dylan is back there, and a whole bunch of others. Fred Astaire is in there somewhere as well. Anyway, there's a guy in the satin boxing robe, and that guy is Sonny Liston. John Lennon never forgot Sonny Liston. There is no Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Each of the Beatles were asked to ask for their heroes, and they were going to put it on the cover. Lennon never forgot Sonny Liston, and there is the mock-up for Sonny Liston for the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. He, of course, would die about a year and a half after the album came out. He did see the Beatles once, he claimed. He wasn't too impressed. Meanwhile, well, John Lennon did have some infatuation with Muhammad Ali. This is at Jimmy Carter's inauguration on January 20th, 1977. In 1972, John Lennon started to write a song called I Am the Greatest. Well, what did Ali say all the time? I'm the greatest. So he's writing the song, I'm the greatest. But he realizes, hey, you know what? I can't write a song called I'm the greatest, but I could give it to somebody. And he gave it to Ringo Starr, and it's on Ringo's 1973 album, I'm the Greatest, his homage to Muhammad Ali. Here they're meeting at the Jimmy Carter inaugural, but these are two guys, 1964, who kind of changed the world. And their meeting takes place in Florida. Meanwhile, about a year later, in 1965, Walt Disney finally decides, I'm going to build Disney World. Disney was looking for a new place. He had Disneyland, which was quite successful. And in 1959, they began to look at another place on the East Coast because very few people on the East Coast actually made it out to Disneyland. And let me tell you a story about Disneyland because I'll be doing the TV talk in 2 weeks. You will be surprised where the money came from to build Disneyland and the trade Walt Disney made. But you're going to have to wait 2 weeks for that, like any good cliffhanger. Market surveys taken by Disney at the time revealed that only 5% of Disneyland's visitors came from east of the Mississippi River. And at that time, 75% of the United States population lived east of the Mississippi. So Walt's looking around, he's looking around, he's looking around, he's looking around. And finally, in November of 1963, after Dwight Eisenhower decided that we needed a network of interstate roads, not necessarily for traffic, but for military means, Disney's flying over Orlando. And he's looking and he sees, wait, they're building the Florida Turnpike and they're building Interstate 4. And there's an Air Force base right to the east. Hey, this place might work. This place may grow. And not only that, they may build an airport for me. And he decides in 1963, let's go to Disney. Let's go to Orlando Kissimmee and build this amusement park, Epcot Center. By the way, some of the ideas that Walt Disney got for Disney World came from the 1964-1965 World's Fair. In fact, Robert Moses kind of gave Disney carte blanche to see what worked and what didn't work and what Disney could take out of the World's Fair. Some of you probably were at the 64 World's Fair, and I bet you maybe one or two of you even snuck in, because every time I do the 1964 talk in the World's Fair, somebody says, yeah, we sneak in, Grand Central Expressway, go up the hill, climb the fence, you were in, no big deal. Disney took an idea called It's a Small World, which my daughter at the time, in 1986, hated It's a Small World and threatened to jump out of the ride. But anyway, so Disney works with It's a Small World. That works at the New York World's Fair. He packs it up, takes it to Disney World, and makes an exact replica for Disney World, or his people would, because he passed away. The other thing was that the Illinois Pavilion in the New York World's Fair had Mr. Lincoln, who talked to you, the robot Mr. Lincoln. And Walt Disney looked at that and said, that's a good idea. Why don't we do a Hall of Presidents, which he did, which went through Richard Nixon when Disney World opened back in 1971. Central Florida became a big place because of Disney World. And Walt looked at it, and in that sense, he was a genius, because who was going to Central Florida in those days? Yeah, they had Citrus World back then, and they had Cypress Gardens back then with Esther Williams, if you remember. But this puts Orlando on the map, and it becomes, depending on the year, it's either the first, second, or third biggest tourist attraction in the United States, with New York and Las Vegas being 1 and 2, or 2 and 3, or 3 and 2. Construction started in 1967. Check out the prices when Walt Disney World opened on October 1st, 1971. $3.50 for adults, $2.50 for juniors under the age of 18, and $1 for children under the age of 12. For $3.50, you might pay a toll going past it on the Florida Turnpike. $3.50. Well, you know, now you got to take out a mortgage to go to Disney World, or 2 mortgages. And they want you on the property too. They want you to stay at their hotels and not leave because they don't want you to go to Universal down the street. The legacy, Orlando and Central Florida become an international destination. We choose to go to the moon. May 25th, 1961, President John F. Kennedy. Kennedy wasn't all that interested in the space program. Wasn't interested at all in the space program. What he was interested in is that Americans landed on the moon before the Soviet Union. And where were they blasting off from? Cape Canaveral, Florida. There's Kennedy looking at Wernher von Braun. Yes, the moon is over there, Mr. President. Right there, right there, right there. And that would be the rocket ship, or the mock-up of the rocket ship that would eventually take man to the moon. And it would start in 1968 with Frank Borman, Bill Anders, and Jim Lovell circling the moon. And Apollo 10 with Thomas Stafford commanding, and the lunar module from Grumman and Beth Page. In fact, Apollo 8 was supposed to be the first one actually to dock with the lunar module. They weren't supposed to go to the moon, but Grumman didn't have it ready, probably got caught in the LIU traffic. So Apollo 10 did that, and of course Apollo 11 landed on the moon. But it all came out of Florida. Now the astronauts did train in Houston, Texas, but the space shots were all from Cape Canaveral. And I remember as a kid, when I was at PS 151 in Woodside, and they'd pull us out of the classrooms, and they would have us go into this big room so we could watch Walter Cronkite narrating that there was another Gemini moonshot, space shot. NASA's first manned space flight program was prepared for the launch of from Cape Canaveral by the U.S. Air Force crews. Suborbital flights made by Alan Shepard, May 5th, 1961. Shepard had the greatest line of all about the space shots. My friend Dick Hull worked for NASA between 1960 and 1975, and then went to the Goddard Space Center in Maryland. And he said Alan Shepard is on top of this rocket ship. And a couple of things were going on. He had to go to the bathroom. They told him to do it in his pants. He said, no, I don't want to do it. Just do it in your pants. But the other thing is, there were a whole bunch of delays before the ship went into space. And Alan Shepard said, you know, this is a government project, you know. And I'm kind of worried about it because it's a government project, because it was built by the lowest bidders. Gus Grissom went into space on July suborbital, never did get into space, just got up and down in 15 minutes. That was on July 21st. The first American in orbit was John Glenn, February 20th, 1962. And if you remember the movie, the Hidden Figures movie, there were four women who were instrumental in that flight. And John Glenn said about one of the women, if she says I could go, I could go. 3 more orbital flights would follow through May of 1963. And I cheated on this one because this one is from Queens. This is the Gemini space capsule, and that's in that Hall of Science area in Flushing. The first manned flight, Gemini 3, I saw that with Miss Alexander's class in 4th grade at PS 151, March 23rd, 1965. Later, Gemini flights were supported by 7 unmanned launches of the Agena target vehicle on the Atlas Agena LC-14 to develop the rendezvous and docking techniques that they needed for the Apollo program to land on the moon. Now, the Apollo program, they had to do some work at Cape Canaveral to get the right launching pad for the Apollo moon landing or moon launches, and the development of the large Saturn V rocket was much bigger than the other rockets. So NASA built the Kennedy Space Center, located west and north of Cape Canaveral on Merritt Island, and that's where they took off, the astronauts heading toward the moon. March 1969, Apollo 9, the third crewed mission of the Apollo series. It was the first flight of the command module and Grumman of Bethpage's lunar service module. That was in March of '69. James McDivitt, Rusty Schweikert, and David Scott spent 10 days in Earth orbit testing aspects critical to landing on the moon, including the lunar module's engines, backpack life support systems, navigation systems, and docking maneuvers. And they did all of their thing in low Earth orbit to make sure everything worked. And then there was Apollo 10 with Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Gene Cernan. By the way, Gene Cernan was the last man to walk on the moon in March of 1972, was it? Yeah, I think 72, with Apollo 17. Apollo 10, the lunar module is up and going, and the lunar module, as you see there, spotted by the John Young in the command module, went within 8 miles of the moon. That was the dress rehearsal on May 18th. Apollo 11, July 16th, 1969. All eyes were on Florida at that time. And there is my buddy, Dick Hull, who is in Australia. And I'm going to tell you an inside story here. That is what Dick Hull saw when, or almost saw when Neil Armstrong was going out on the moon with about 20 seconds left to get this picture down in Australia. And the picture comes in upside down, which presents a problem because within 20 seconds, the 600 million or whoever, how many we're going to watch Neil Armstrong step on the moon. And Dick tells his boss, he says, hey, we got a problem here. And Dick says, well, I'm going to go across the room and get a mirror and we'll straighten it out. His boss says, no, I'm going to fire you if you do that. He said, but you're going to be the laughing stock of the world. With about 8 seconds left, Dick realized that it was a new system and maybe somebody did not flip the switch. He flipped the switch and you got the right picture. And that all came out of Florida. And that picture, of course, becomes MTV, which did not start in Florida when MTV started up in 1981. The Apollo program would continue through 1972. Only one mission never made it to the moon. That was Apollo 13. And that's because the service module blew up. Congress cut funding for Apollo 18, 19, and 20, the last lunar landing December 11th, 1972. So we're almost at the 48th anniversary, and that is Apollo 11 at the Smithsonian Institute. And the last time it was seen anywhere was at the Museum of Flight in Seattle, March 16th through September 2nd, because it was on tour. Speaking of the moon, one of these days, Alice, one of these days, bang, zoom, to the moon. You couldn't do that today, could you? It's politically incorrect, right? Andy is laughing. I see Andy laughing there at that. Anyway, and by the way, as you will find out in my TV talk, Ralph Cramden did not threaten to send Alice to the moon on CBS first. He did it somewhere else, but you have to wait 2 weeks for that. In 1964, Jackie Gleason decided, hey, let's move the CBS TV show to the Miami Beach Auditorium on Washington Avenue. Johnny Olson, and this is critical. There were a couple things that were going on in Florida at that time. In the Northeast, there was a guy by the name of Jim Dooley. You might remember Jim Dooley. Come on down, the weather is fine. He targeted people in the Northeast and the Midwest for either coming down to Florida to live or to come down on vacation. And that was Jim Dooley. I don't know what ever happened to Jim Dooley, but I do know what happened to Jackie Gleason and Johnny Olson. Johnny Olson ended up being the announcer on all of Goodson Todman's game shows in the 1970s. I think he did 8 of them. Johnny Olson, the announcer, opened up the show every week from the fun and sun capital of the world, Miami Beach. It's the Jackie Gleason Show. Gleason gives exposure to Miami. Gleason also picked up a groupie while he was down there and basically helped him out in his career. A guy by the name of Larry Ziegler, who is on local radio, WIOD in Miami, who you might know better as Larry King. That was Jackie Gleason's protege, Larry King. Anyway, Gleason would close by shouting, the Miami Beach audiences are the greatest in the world. Except they were made up mostly of New Yorkers vacationing in Miami. You didn't have to know that, but Miami Beach audiences are the greatest in the world. Gleason did give Miami Beach 6 years of high visibility showbiz. High visibility showbiz, because everybody was on this show. Everybody was anybody. Frank Sinatra, Milton Berle. If you were somebody, hey, you went to Miami for a week, all you have to do was show up on the show. You didn't rehearse, because Gleason didn't rehearse. And the show was successful until it ended in 1970 on CBS. That is my friend Shelley Saltman. Shelley Saltman was beaten up by Evel Knievel. He promoted the 1973 Billie Jean King, Bobby Riggs Battle of the Sexes. That was me and Shelley in 2015. In 2015 in Los Angeles. And the reason I bring up Shelley is that Shelley promoted the Jackie Gleason golf tournament. Shelley was promoting all of the stars, whether it was Andy Williams and his golf tournament or Jackie Gleason and a whole bunch of others, because golf and stars, the PGA in those days thought if you could get a star like Bob Hope or Bing Crosby to be the quote-unquote host, it'd be more interesting golf. And they got Jackie Gleason down there. And the only reason that I put that up there is, do you want a Jackie Gleason story? Yes or no? Just somebody put up their fingers. If you want a Jackie Gleason story, just go like that. And I'll give you a Jackie Gleason. You want a Jackie Gleason story. Okay. So Shelley is promoting, because I was going to give it to you anyway, whether you wanted it or not. Anyway, Shelley was promoting the Jackie Gleason Open down in Miami. And so he's riding around with Gleason. They're going through what they have to do. The tournament starts with the Pro-Am on Wednesday, and then the rest of the tournament on Thursday, with the qualifiers on Monday and Tuesday. So Shelley is is with him, and they're going somewhere. And Shelley takes a look at the vest that Jackie Gleason's wearing. And Gleason looks at him, he says, "You like my vest?" He said, "Oh yeah, I love that vest." He said, "I wish I knew where I could get one." And Gleason says, "Come on with me." He said, "Well, where?" He said, "Don't worry about it, just come with me." They get in the car together, and Jackie Gleason drives out to what looks like an airplane hangar, but that's where he's got all his stuff. And he parks the car, and he brings Shelley in. He opens the door with the key, and he goes to this back room. And on the door, it says, "I wish." And so Shelley just looks, "I wish." He said, "Nah, just come in here." He says, "What size you take?" He says, well, about 44. Shelley played basketball at University of Massachusetts back in the late 1940s, and every one of his records there was broken by Julius Erving. Just a side, something on the side. Anyway, he opens the door, and it's like walking into Cy Sims. He had clothes in every size, all the same. He says, "You're 44? He said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, go over there." And the vest is there. And he looks at it. He says, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" He said, "Keep it." He said, "Oh, keep it. Oh, thank you. Thank you." He said, "By the way, that sign on the door, 'I wish.' What's that sign mean?" He says, "Oh, I wish. I wish I could fit into the smaller sizes of these clothes." Jackie Gleason, one of a kind. So he hosted the golf tournament. He would introduce Larry King to the world by being a guest on his local radio show, and he helped Larry King with his career. Joe Namath. There is me in 1988 with my friend Bruce Morton, who listened to my 1965 talk yesterday, Gabe. Joe Namath, we're interviewing him. Weave Eubank behind him, the coach of the New York Jets. Now, this year may be a little different. I don't know what you do on Super Bowl Sunday. If you're like me, you avoid Super Bowl Sunday and you go to a restaurant because nobody's at the restaurant. Yogi Berra once said, nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. Well, you can on Super Bowl Sunday. Anyway, so we're talking about what happened in 1969. The culture changes in 1969. The Super Bowl becomes something of major importance. And behind Joe and behind Bruce is Weave Eubank, who arguably coached the winning coach in the two greatest games in NFL history. For you Giants fans, you might want to cover your ears because the Colts beat the Giants in 1958 in the quote-unquote greatest game ever played, December 28th, 1958. The score there was 23-17. And Weave coached the Jets to beat the Baltimore Colts. But there's stories here. And because of Joe Namath, the Super Bowl is what it is today. You can't argue with that. You might be able to argue with his Medicare commercials because that's what he's doing now. But he changes football in 1969. January 12th, 1969, the Super Bowl name became the unofficial official name of the game. They really didn't have a big-time name prior to 1969. What people didn't know at noon on the day of January 12th local time in Miami, that the football industry was, and the culture of the American public was about ready to change before their eyes. In fact, kickoff was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. As of 3:30 in the afternoon, you could still get a ticket to the Jets-Colts game. And there is Pete Rozelle, the commissioner of the NFL, and there is me. That's back in 1986 when I used to wear ties and a sport coat. That was the USFL NFL antitrust trial in Lower Manhattan. Fortune magazine took that picture, and there I was. And Pete Rozelle was the commissioner of the National Football League. And Pete Rozelle hated the fact that the American Football League's New York Jets beat his league, the New York Giants, the National Football League. There was a lot of bitterness between the AFL and the NFL. But Rozelle told me, in the end, it was the best thing that ever happened to his league. The Jets upset that day, mushroomed interest in the game. That's the Orange Bowl, which is no longer around. That is my wife standing under the goalpost at the Orange Bowl. A couple things that happened leading up to that game in terms of why that game took on such an importance. In a Fort Lauderdale bar, Joe Namath picked a fight with Lou Michaels, who was with the Baltimore Colts. He was the kicker on the Colts. Michaels' brother, Walt, was the Jets' defensive coordinator. And history is written by the winners, generally. And I went to see what the loser had to say. And Lou Michaels lost 3 times that day, or 3 times that week. He's just relaxing in this bar. Namath walks in. He spots Lou Michaels, who's a dead ringer for his brother, Walt Michaels. Walks out. He has Jim Hudson with him. Walks back in, and he points his finger at Lou Michaels and says, "We're going to on Sunday, and I'm going to be the one who's going to do it." Words are exchanged. They're yelling, and there's some yelling there. And Lou Michaels said, "You know, I was really unhappy with Joe because I thought he'd just come over, say hello, shake our hands, and, you know, and that was that." He said, "I never imagined this." And then he said on top of that, he says, "He's wearing a fur coat. He's wearing a fur coat, Miami. It's January 6th. He's wearing a fur coat." He said, "I'll never forget it. He's wearing a fur coat in Miami." So there's some words exchanged. But at the end of the night, Joe picked up the tab and paid for the whatever they were drinking. And then Joe, the next day, holds a news conference, and it's on Miami Beach, and he's laying in the chaise lounge, and you got all these people who look like, you know, Gertie and Gertie is there. And, "Oh, wait until I tell the girls. You know, Beverly's she's never gonna believe this guy. I met Joe Namath." And that picture is all over the place. All over the place. Joe Namath hanging out in Miami on the chaise lounge. And these people from the Bronx are sitting there asking him, "Is that really you?" "That's real." "Oh, the girls aren't going to ever believe this." And that is picking up publicity. And then the Jets finally win that game. And that kind of changes things. Kansas City would win the next game. It would become a big deal. And then on the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California, the first big party in 1973, people decided, hey, if they could party, we could party. And the Super Bowl takes on an entire life. May not have happened as fast if Joe Namath and the Jets in Miami don't beat Baltimore. In fact, if Baltimore wins, it probably sets back football about 10 years. There's Yogi, me and Yogi, back in 2006 when I spoke at the Yogi Berra Museum. Yogi, of course, did a lot of spring training in Florida. Spring training in Florida, well, that's something that changed baseball, right? Not in the 1960s, but spring training started in Florida in 1888. A Washington team trained in Jacksonville. Miami did have a stadium for a long, long time. Miami Stadium, the home of the Baltimore Orioles, the home of the minor league Miami Marlins. A funny story, actually. In Florida in 1903, right after Flagler opens up Florida and people begin to say, hey, Florida's a great thing. 1903, Connie Mack's Philadelphia A's of the American League tried Jacksonville to train. Now, they had a pitcher by the name of Rube Waddell who was having he was down on his luck. He's really down on his luck. And he might have killed the experience for spring training. I don't know how many of you have gone down to spring training to watch baseball, but this might have ended it. So Waddell, he's jilted by a girlfriend maybe, or maybe a groupie or somebody he knows, and he's really down on his luck, so he decides to have a wrestling match with an alligator. Fortunately, he survived. Florida didn't work in 1903, although Flagler was trying his best to make it work. Spring training in Florida would begin in 1913. Chicago Cubs trained in Tampa. Cleveland Indians in Pensacola. 1 year later, 2 more teams moved to Florida for spring training. That is the real start of what is now known as the Grapefruit League. Some other things that happened in Florida. The Beatles, of course, were there in 1964. Also in Florida in 1964, something interesting. A couple of weeks after, 7 weeks after Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law, the Beatles were scheduled to perform at the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville on September 11th, 1964. And they put out the word, if there is a segregated crowd in the Gator Bowl, if blacks and whites cannot sit together, we're not playing. They desegregated the Gator Bowl on September 11th, 1964. Blacks and whites were allowed to sit together. And John Lennon and McCartney and everybody else said, hey, some of our heroes were Fats Domino, Chuck Berry. We're not going to condone this. We want blacks and whites to sit together. They didn't think it was a big deal. It was a big deal. They desegregated Florida, at least concert-wise. The music industry would set up shop in the 1970s. The Beatles, of course, were there. The Beatles only played Florida once in Jacksonville, and you could say a second time because they were on the Sullivan Show. But British musicians decided to move into Florida in the 1970s. I don't know how many of you know Don Francisco, who retired a couple of years ago. Mario Krutzenberger, that was his real name. He was from South America, and he had Sábado Gigante, which lasted for about 35, 40 years, Spanish TV. It was a combination of Let's Make a Deal, Amateur Hour. It was on for about 4 or 5 hours a night. Miami has become the Spanish-speaking TV capital of the United States. He brought his show up from South America. Also in Florida, if you were looking back in the 60s, this is what Gleason brought to Florida eventually. Telemundo, Telefrontera, Galavision, Mega TV, Univision Communications Inc., Universal Music, Latin Entertainment, RCTV International, and Sunbeam TV. And it was Gleason who was the one who opened up Florida. Music-wise, Casey and the Sunshine Band came from Hialeah. And they had all those great hits in the 1970s that I never liked. But I've come to appreciate them 45 years later or so. Miami Vice, Gleason opened up the TV industry. Miami Vice would be the next big TV show out of Florida, and Gloria Estefan, of course, was a big star out of Florida. And they did get a basketball team eventually, Miami. They got a football team, the Miami Dolphins, in 1966. And that was the first professional sports team that was in Florida. The Miami Heat started about 1989. Dwayne Wade was, look at the uniform. It's a Miami Vice uniform. The Casey and Sunshine Band, get down tonight. That's the way I like it. Shake your booty, and I'm your boogie man. So Florida, Jackie Gleason opens it up for entertainment. The Beatles open it up for music. Walt Disney uses the World's Fair in 1964 and 65 as a blueprint for what he eventually does in Kissimmee, Orlando for Disney World. Did civilizations clash? Was it a collision of worlds? Well, Bob Lipsyte said yes, and back in the 1960s, you might have said yes, because the Beatles were young, Ali was young, and both of them would lead to the anti-war movement. Lennon would, of course, write the song Give Peace a Chance. Ali refused to induction in the United States military. Flagler, the New Yorker. Flagler, the New Yorker, was the one who dreamed this all up, the American Riviera, and he did it on the Atlantic Ocean. On the west side, that was built up a lot sooner by Cubans and others. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any questions or want to add comments. No, I didn't talk about Wolfie's and all the other places on Miami Beach. Most of them are all gone. Miami Beach is not known as Miami Beach anymore. It's known as South Beach. Any questions, any comments?
Please feel free to type them
for your daggers
in the chat, or if you'd like to use the raise hand feature, I'll unmute the mic, and you're welcome to ask your question. If you type your question in the chat, I'll be glad to read it, and
I can read it too. So
sure, whatever you like, no problem.
How many of you have gone down to Florida? Yeah, Andy has. Yeah, Andreas has. You've been in Florida. You know what Florida is all about? Traffic. Can't get anywhere. Takes an hour to go to the beach if you're 1 mile away. So any questions, any comments about Florida or those things that happened in the 1960s? I'll throw out this question. Was Lipsyte right? Did worlds collide? We got one, we got one, we got one. Hang on, I will get that. Very enjoy. Thank you, Carl. Thanks, Carl. Carl comes to a lot of my talks, and he was at my last live talk in Bronxville, New York in March, and he was like 30 feet away from me. Bronxville Library has a stage, and the good thing about it, because at the beginning of the pandemic, no masks, the audience was 25 feet away from me. So thank you, Carl.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anybody else? So I just posed the question, was Lipsyte right? Did worlds collide in 1964 in Miami Beach?
I think so. I definitely
Who's that talking?
It's Steve.
Steve, yeah.
Because you know, you had a great boxer and humanitarian, and then a musical group that took the world by storm, and it's all legendary.
Now it is, but on February 19th, 1964, it might not have been. You know, history is a funny thing. History is an extremely funny thing. If one of them fails, nobody remembers this meeting. And you could go on eBay and in other places, and you see those prints from that day, and you get good money for that, especially if one of the five signed it. You know, you could get really good money if one of the five signed it. I do have an Ali autograph. I never met any of the Beatles, but I do have an Ali autograph addition to a picture. My autograph actually with Ali is on this big boxing sheet. It was a 25th anniversary of the World Boxing Association, so I got him and every other pug in the world on there that was there that day. Anybody else? Hang on, let's get that one up. I felt like it provided a blueprint for popular culture for 30 years. Andy, no, I never saw anything live. Obviously, I've seen fights of Ali. I saw him in that last thing with Larry Holmes in 1980. And I got to know Larry, who owns He's got hotels and stuff in eastern Pennsylvania, right over the Jersey border. And Ali, when I was able to talk to him in 1982, I asked him about that fight. And Larry Holmes used to be his sparring partner. And Larry actually cried after he beat the hell out of Ali. Ali said that it was about the 7th round. And he looks at Larry, he said, "Why are you upset?" He said, "I don't want to whoop you like that. I don't want to whoop you like that." And Ali said, "So if you don't want to whoop me like that, why are you doing it?" Ali had 2 fights after that. Shelley, you saw the picture of Shelley, quit with Ali. He had been with Ali from 71 to 78, 79. And he said, "I didn't want to see the champ get beaten up," and he was. Interesting story about Shelley and Ali. Shelley was hired by Ali's people for the Frazier fight to promote it. And Shelley told Ali, he says, "Listen, I don't like you. I served in Korea." He served with Armed Forces Radio, basically, so he didn't see any action, but he was in the Army during Korea. He said, "I didn't like you. I didn't like you went into the military." And Shelley said that Ali told him, he said, "You know what? After I'm done, we're going to go out to dinner." And for 3 hours, Ali explained to him why he was a conscientious objector. And Shelley said, "Yeah," he said, "I understood it and I had a lot of respect for him." I'm going to give you an Ali story you never heard before, or maybe you have. Remember, he fought Inoki, the wrestler versus boxer, and Shelley promoted that. And the wrestler Inoki, this was in Japan, just laid on the canvas and just kicked Ali. And Ali developed blood clots in his leg over the night, and he gets checked out. Now he's got a flight the next morning to South Korea because he is going to perform exhibitions for the military in Seoul. And the doctor says, "No, you're not going." He says, "Yes, I am. I made a commitment to the military. I am going to go there." And he has fever and all this other stuff. And they said, you can't do this. You're taking your life in your own hands. He said, "I don't care. I made this commitment." And he goes and he does the exhibitions and then ends up in the hospital for about 10 days because he had all kinds of infections from being kicked in the leg. And I don't know if you knew that story or not. But Shelley was there, and I never knew that story. I never knew that story at all until Shelley told me that story. So he had a commitment to the military, believe it or not. But yeah, the Beatles, I watched them on Ed Sullivan with 73 million other people. So anybody else? I could sit here all night telling you stories. And I've done that in the past. Andreas, you have a story?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So it's not so much a story. I have a brother that lives down there for the last 20 years, and I've gone back and forth for business and whatnot. And Florida strikes me as a extremely diverse, or at least much more diverse than any of the other states in the U.S. It's like they have Native Indians, Baptists, Cubans, Canadians, some drug activity, wealthy Northerners, snowbirds and the like, and it's a combo that I don't see anywhere else in the United States. So it's not really a question, it's more of a comment.
Well, that all happened because of what happened in the 1960s. Sullivan, Gleason, and things were happening down there. Did you go to the beach? And yeah, the artists emerged. The photographers loved the beach. Again, the 1960s. And they do have the Art Deco downtown in Old Miami by the cruise ship terminals. And they're building that area up. That area is filled with high-rises now. But again, you know, people knew Cypress Gardens, Circus World, spring training baseball. But after, and people didn't travel for spring training back in those days either. You know, the Yankees, some people went to Fort Lauderdale, some people went to St. Petersburg. Lakeland, where the Tigers played, there's a lot of people from Michigan who live in that Lakeland area because the Tigers were there. In Vero Beach with the Dodgers, that was the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers. But people didn't move down there from Brooklyn. But you're right about Yeah, 70s. Well, yeah, a lot of drug cartels there in the 70s too, right? Colombian drug cartels. Anything else? Well, if that's it, I want to thank Steve for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you for giving this.
I hope people enjoyed this, and hope it brought back some memories of the Beatles or Ali or Jackie Gleason or Joe Namath. And how many of those were New York people? A lot of New York people. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll be doing the early days of TV.
December 18th,
December
same time.
18th, same
6 p.m.
time. And I talk about maybe the network that was the most cutting edge ever that didn't last, the Dumont network. And I talk about the beginnings of cable TV. And I end with Gilligan's Island and Star Trek.
I have a question for you about that. I'll ask it now. But the Dumont network, did they really destroy all of the tapes?
Most of them.
Films and
Most of them.
wow, yeah, I know. Sometimes little snippets turn up on YouTube. It's,
I'll tell you where where a lot of the Dumont stuff that still survives is located. It's at Montclair State University in New Jersey, and they have the studios are called the Dumont Studios. And guy Marty used to run it. He was at CNBC, and then he retired from there, and he ran the studio at Montclair State University. And the way he set it up, when you walked in there, you thought that Dumont was there. They had an old, at least case, Dumont case, and they put a new TV in there, and whatever was left over that they found, they threw on a VCR, now a DVD, and you were able to watch some of the old Gleason shows from the Cavalcade of Stars on that TV. I will tell you the story about Ernie Kovacs. Ernie was there, and they were cutting edge. They were, because, you know, they had to, but I'll tell you that in 2 weeks. But yeah, there was a lawyer who got upset. There were fights, and they decided, you know what, I'm going to end all this. So he went up to this warehouse in the Bronx, got all the tapes together, or the videos or kinescopes, threw them into a truck, dumped them in the East River. Where they joined the 1952 Topps 7th Series baseball cards that Cy Berger in 1952. I knew Cy. He invented the modern baseball card, and that came out in July or August. Mickey Mantle was in there, that series. And all the candy stores returned all the cards, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he loaded up a couple trucks, went over to the East River, dumped all those baseball cards in there. And the Mickey Mantle card today in good condition is worth about $90,000, $100,000. In mint condition, about $250,000. So if you ever want to dredge the East River, you might find old Dumont shows and baseball cards, along with other things in the East River. So, anyway, I'm going to let you go. Some of you probably have to eat dinner. And then anybody else before we close up? Evan Weiner, I'm looking forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. And again, Steve, thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope to see you in 2 weeks. If I don't, everybody have a safe and healthy holiday, and enjoy the holiday within reason. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Evan.
Bye-bye. Whoops, I got one more here in chat. Hang on before we go. Thank you, Suzanne. And thank everybody for tonight. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Steve, for inviting me.
thank you.